All right, we're about to go live. We are live. All right, welcome back after the floor. It's just past 2 p.m. in general and housing. And we are going to take a little bit of time right now to hear from, in particular, from Representative Chestnut Tangerman, Representative Burrows, and we have Representative McGill from the Human Services. Actually, Representative McGill, if you'd like to sit in, just to join the circle here, to talk about a bill that's in the draft form, but also just the concepts that were discussed a few weeks ago. I was asked to suggest that some people join us, what we call the subgroup, and there were folks from our committee and Human Services, and they were tasked with wrestling for a couple of weeks on the issues of homelessness and what is it that we can start to do to really lay a foundation for future policy based on the reality that we're going to lose access to motels and we're going to lose access to some rental subsidy money. And one of the issues that came out of it, that really actually precipitated it, was the fact that we had asked for a more direct plan from DCF and OEO and didn't really receive it. There was a lot of churn, at least in DCF over the fall. And I think that must have contributed to their not being able to formulate a solid plan. And so I just wanted to kind of start with the folks here who were on the subgroup to just sort of review what it was you did in the meetings, how you came to the conclusion you came, and then just discuss. There's a draft bill which hasn't been introduced.
I just forwarded, we had all met, and then I don't think you guys you have a printed copy, kind of a newer draft of the bill that we just we had kind of stopped meeting for a bit. So I just sent that out to everyone. So you all in the committee.
House General.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you want to pull that up while we're talking.
Ron, did that come to you? Did that go to Ron as well?
It went to the House
General
Housing. Does that not include Ron?
No, it should.
Oh, perfect. I will send it to you as well.
I also just sent Ron and Katie, Scott.
Okay, so we'll deal with that as well. So I don't know that we need to look at it first. I think we just need to have the conversation first, and then after this conversation, we have two bill introductions, H378 and H391, which are housing related as well. And the concept of H391 is, just as a spoiler alert, is part of the conversation for what the subgroup would be presenting if we introduce this bill as either a committee bill or take pieces from it. Of which there is which is what Representative Chestnut Tangerman is talking about, a section of the bill that we'd like to consider before Friday. So with that, Robin, do you want to turn your phone off or
I do want to do that. Sorry.
Representative Chestnut Tangerman sent me something that I shared with the committee. Should I post it as well?
Yes, please. Yes, but please just put draft on it. I haven't requested it as a committee bill yet, so. And I'm sorry, so Jubilee, do you know everybody here?
The most.
Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Representative Kathleen James from Arlington, Sandgate, Sunderland, and Manchester.
Joe Parsons, Topsom, Groton, and Newbury.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington.
You're our guest, so.
Dennis Labonte, Caledonia 3.
Elizabeth Burrows, Windsor 1, which is West Windsor and Windsor.
Larry Lieber, Essex, Orleans District 1.
Mary Howard, Rutland District 6.
And Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Rutland Bennington District.
Thank you. You are from?
I am from Bridport. I also represent Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
All right, Robin. yours.
Okay, so there was a subcommittee with
What about the people on
What
the
about the
screen?
people on the
Yeah.
What's that?
numbers on the screen.
Yeah, members on the screen. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, Jubilee. Caleb Elder, Starksboro.
And Ashley Bartley, Fairfax, Georgia.
All right, thanks, everybody. Did we get everybody here? We'll get everybody else here. So Representative Chestnut Tangeman, please lead the conversation if you would.
So there was a joint, I don't even know what the correct term is, task force, a working group between Human Services and Housing. And the two members from Human Services were Representative McGill and Representative Small. And from here, Elizabeth Burrows, Representative Burrows, and Representative Lamont. And I would meet occasionally. Really, it was Human Services that took the lead on this, putting together a bill of response to emergency housing, the need for services, and a response to emergency housing ending. And a lot of that was really focused on support going forward and appropriate responses. And so Human Services did take the lead on that. There was a draft bill that evolved over time. It's 24 pages. A number of different ideas, concepts, some being studies looking forward, some being what do we do immediately now, others how do we expand services that are currently available to some people, how do we expand those more broadly. And a lot of these are also elements that will appear in other bills that are in various committees around the House. So these will reappear elsewhere, or pieces of it will. And what we, the bill, we decided not to present the bill through to the House on the floor, but this committee will look at a piece of it, and Human Services. I don't know, Representative McGill, if you will be taking up pieces of this in your committee.
We, the only possible one would be if we decide, I think Teresa was gonna talk more, Tom, would be possibly just the crisis standards of housing. If we were to do that, since it references the GA program, it would need to start with us.
That's section 4.
What?
Is that section 4?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is also the section that we pulled out.
So we did the draft I sent out, we had pulled it out because we weren't sure if it was gonna start here. We'd have to pull it out was our understanding, but I have it as well that I could send that language.
And that's language that you just shared, right?
Yes.
Right, so there's a section 4 that's in here, and then there's that language.
It's the final draft of the bill, the one we just sent to you does not have it in it. Because I think Teresa thought that you guys were gonna start with a bill, and then her thinking was we'd add it once it came, or if it came kind of thing. There's a lot of coordination of, who's doing what, when, and where. It's not, the draft I just emailed you, it does not exist in that draft. So I'm glad that Robin sent out the language.
So there's two. Do you want them both posted or just one that represents just McDaniels?
Post them both, just with drafts, because they're not official bills yet.
Right, and you don't want them listed as draft number, as simply as documents.
Yeah.
So, Chair Stevens, would you like us to go through this bill quickly and the topics that we looked at?
Yeah, just how did you respond to, like, how did you respond, first of all, like, what drove this in the first place? I know you mentioned it in the introduction, but I just, maybe a little, because the impetus came from Human Services, Representative McGill, maybe you can sort of, tee us up on, in more detail about, well, what is it that we were seeking to do? Because when Representative Wood and I met with them, it was just a question of saying, ask for what's needed, ask for what's possible, and don't worry about compromise or negotiation or whatever. What is it that you identified that needed to be done in order to create that foundation for the future policy stuff?
Yeah, so we looked at barriers or things that were causing folks to become homeless, and then also sometimes barriers for folks who are homeless or looking for housing, barriers to actually getting into housing. And we looked at legislation that had been kind of introduced in the past, so we weren't, reinventing the wheel. Also, time was limited. We met with various kind of interested parties, VHCB, VHFA, legal aid, advocates, and other lobbyists, the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition, and tried to see what we could pack into one bill. So I can go over the various sections, just a brief. One of the things is we looked at some security deposit reform, which kind of limits the amount a landlord can charge when someone's leasing up. We looked at Burlington's guidance. They have a restriction. So the most a tenant they can have a tenant prepay before moving in is 1 month's rent, and is their first month's rent, and a security deposit that can be equal to 1 month's rent. We looked at rent caps so not rent caps, but rent increase caps. So that folks aren't being priced out of their housing once they're in housing. We have a section on tenant right to first refusal, which kind of expands on some of the co-op laws that already exist in our state. And so require, if a landlord is going to sell their building, they first have to give the tenants an opportunity to consider if they might want to join a co-op and purchase their building. We talked with VHCB. VHCB has experience with this. There's funds. They just kind of need the legislative intent that they be used that way, and they're happy to do that. There's the eviction diversion, which Josie are going to talk about more. There's just cause evictions. I missed that section. That's earlier on. There is a homeless response system analysis study, and that really kind of re-establish the work group that used to exist, that was kind of initiated by the administration, and kind of, it used to be where more of the high level administrators were part of that working group, and then it kind of devolved. So they would designate someone to come in their place, and it's really seemed really important that those with the decision-making power were at the meeting, was the feedback we got from some of the, from a lot of the organizations and coalitions we spoke to. So our hope is that we could reestablish it with that kind of level of participation, and then that would also include, folks like VSHA and the Affordable Housing Coalition and the Coalition to End Homelessness. We'd also like to see some folks with lived experience on there. And then there's a section that, Section 5, we define emergency shelters, and that's just for the next two sections where there's an appeal to the Environmental Division that residential development will not result in an undue adverse effect on the character of the area affecting and shall not be subject to an appeal. That section would just make it easier for, not easier, but allow shelters to expand, for us to build more shelters in designated downtowns where the folks who need them are close to services, close to all the things, stores and not being pushed out to rural areas. So it would allow us, we need more shelter spaces or SROs. It would just allow us to make that happen. And then and then section 7 is the follow-up to that, and it adds emergency shelter to the list of development that cannot be limited or interfered with the intended functional use. And so that's the kind of high-level overview of the bill. A lot of different pieces.
The zoning piece, my take on this was, for instance, here in Montpelier, there's not just Montpelier, it's what I know of in Central Vermont anyway, is that a lot of the evening shelters don't allow entrance until a certain time and force an exit at a certain time, and they say that that's based on zoning. Is that what this is attempting to?
That's what the last one.
Was that?
Yeah, that's what the last one is.
That's the last section. The last one, it's, regulating the daily or seasonal hours of operation of an emergency shelter shall constitute interfering with the intended use. So that's one of the things that makes it so it allows them to be built, and then it makes it so the municipalities can't interfere with the intended use, and addresses that problem.
As Bill mentioned, did I hear SROs? Did I hear that mentioned?
It pairs with a little bit with the recovery residences and just that kind of the group home. We made sure the language will work together.
Right, so just SROs.
Single room occupancy.
Right, which when I Wikipedia this a couple of months ago.
Oh, sorry.
It was.
Single room occupancy.
Right,
Yeah.
it was just, there is a stereotype about them, or there is a history that they are, I don't know, the word Fleabag usually goes along with it, or it really not, I mean, we developed better, what we think and thought was better housing from SROs, because they were essentially just they had a purpose, but they were being misused. Mm-hmm. It's a concept that has been out of vogue for quite some time, and so even the concept of what an SRO might be different from a recovery residence, right? Because a recovery residence would theoretically be a home in a neighborhood that had bedrooms and had room for a certain number of people. But I just want to throw that out there as a concept that we would have to do more research on.
And I'm happy to, I manage supportive housing, and we have a really successful model with SROs, with project-based vouchers. I work with the homeless population. It was a popular model that a lot of the folks in hotels, when we were inventory surveying on what they wanted, we want this is the type of housing they need, or this is the type of the housing they need. We did some extensive surveying of the folks in our county, and it was something they wanted. They like the idea of community, the shared space. It's a really great model for bringing services in on site and having people engage in those services. So it is a model that historically we kind of moved away from, but I think you'll hear a lot of folks are actually interested in moving back towards that.
Well, it comes in the conversation with using the motels in the first place, which I think in its best vision, an SRO would be a dorm situation where there's like a social area, there's a kitchen, there's shared places, bathrooms that, but essentially you would have a room.
You also have a private space. Yeah.
No, it's interesting to hear the conversation begin again, because it's a little bit, I carry a lot of the negativity of the historical uses.
Yes.
From following them from for a long time, but it'll be interesting to examine what does it mean in a modern world? Is it new construction? Is it, taking taking an old building and turning it into
Yeah.
some, so that would be an interesting concept. Are you aware of the Haven programs at all?
Yes,
Do they have such a,
they've had some plans that have become controversial in the Upper Valley, and some very strong feelings on both sides of whether to follow through with them. But currently, they're really more plans.
and when you say both sides, is it a NIMBY thing, or is it a landlord tenant thing, or is it a?
It's not really a NIMBY thing. It's more, it is about location, but it's not, people aren't rejecting it because they don't want it in their neighborhood. They just don't want it a block from the school. It's sort of going back and forth about that.
And the focus on downtowns takes into account, I would imagine, that many people who are experiencing homelessness or who are unhoused may not have a car and need to be close to
Public
a
transportation.
pharmacy, a grocery store. This is, these focuses, if they were all in place, how do you think, what are the support services that would be needed to ensure that these had that other leg of the stool? Because these are about providing access.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this was designed to go with kind of the budget recommendations we made, and that were part of, what we, part of the memo we sent to appropriations, where we really did invest in the wraparound support. We added more money to the HOP program, which is often where a lot of the service providers get most of their operational funding. So we
HOP is Housing
and Opportunity Program. We were, that was kind of already part of our thinking when we did our budget work this year.
One of the things about the ideas here is that they really run the gamut from long-range zoning changes and potential buildings to immediate things like capping what a landlord can ask for upfront, which would have immediate effect. It's a very simple thing. And same with the eviction diversion. We heard that the average amount
Less than 3,000, yeah.
in a diversion, $2,700. I mean, not a diversion, eviction.
Yeah.
Small amounts, small steps, which can have an immediate effect.
And there was in S100, again, we're seeing that housing lands in a lot of our committees. There's in the S100 coming over from the Senate, I believe there's still money that is in the program for $2.5 million, I think was originally requested, appropriated for a landlord reimbursement program. I think it was primarily for rent, because again, that eviction study that I have shared the link to a couple different times, that's where between $2,700 is
That's
probably higher now than it was before. But it's the idea is there a way to make landlords whole, at least on the rent? And then there are other programs where money's available for landlords as well. But all of this is very tenant oriented right now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we wanted to start from. because that's who we're responding to, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions, either for Rep. McGill or Rep. Chestnut Benjamin, whoever. Question about the just cause eviction section of the bill. So if the property owner wants to renovate the building or put it to some other use,
There are some carve-outs within the just cause. First, doesn't apply to properties where there are 2 or 3 units and they're owner occupied. There's if a landlord wants to, let's say, revert it, they have a family member who there's a good faith understanding that they are going to move a family member in, then that they're allowed to have someone leave for that. And then there are
There's also a lot of
language around
what cause means. Like there is good cause eviction when a tenant doesn't, a landlord under this, a landlord couldn't kick out a tenant if the lease is simply up. But if the tenant has done
caused damage,
been loud, had drug use in the unit, or, list of different things, that's cause. That's different from just buying up a property and kicking everybody out.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
what if you want to renovate?
There's a carve out for renovations.
Yes.
The renovations have to be something like have to equal
50% of the, yeah.
Is that on page?
It is on page, the just cause eviction starts on page 4 and goes to page 8.
I saw the carve out for owner occupancy, good faith owner occupancy. I think I missed the list of.
So a lot of these
So I'll look through
causes, the thing that's confusing about using the phrase just cause is there are many reasons for just cause or good cause that are in statute. I think what the goal of this is to eliminate no cause evictions, which is simply being able to say for no reason whatsoever to have someone's tenancy end. And that's what we've seen, again, prior to the pandemic. The stats show that 70% of all evictions were related to back rent, which if there's cash available and there's communication between the landlord and the tenant, which isn't always the case, there's a way, there could be a way to alleviate that problem, which just tells me that 70% of the relationships between landlords and tenants when something starts to go south are okay. It could be difficult, but they're okay, because if it's only about money, and then a certain percentage of the last 30% is a little bit more difficult, but still related to money, and then there's 10 to 15% that were regarded as the stereotypically bad relationships between landlords and tenants, which is still a substantial number, there's no question. The other piece was, but in the times it's changed, since we've had the VRAP program, the numbers have changed, the percentages, because a lot of evictions have been taken care of up to a certain point, and we're now approaching the next certain point. And then so no cause evictions have risen, or as percentages of evictions have risen on one hand because the money related ones have gone down because of the programs that we've had in place, but also because real estate values have jumped way up and rental prices have jumped way up and people wanting to sell their homes, which again, for us, public policy versus private property is really at play here hard. Representative Krasnow, then James.
Yeah, can we if we could just back up for a second? So this is, right now, what's happening is the sub-working group came together with ideas, put in a draft, and we're going to do more work on that. I'm confused,
There are bills on the wall, so that for instance, there's a co-op bill.
Right.
This essentially took ideas that some of them existed and some of them didn't. I will probably ask for this to be a committee bill, and then we can pull it apart, take it apart, and put it back together again. Or these elements of this bill, the reason to use it as a committee bill for the second half of the year is, again, we're gonna get the housing bill from the Senate, which is an omnibus style bill, but it doesn't deal specifically with rentals yet. And so this is mostly rental related. And so I'm trying to keep it, for our purposes, to keep it separate. It may end up in another bill. It may end up in the back and forth between now and the end of the year. But this gives us the opportunity, having this gives us the opportunity to work on these issues, some of which we're not going to settle before the end of the year. We're certainly not going to settle them before Friday. But there, and issues like we'll hear from eviction diversion. You know, these are concepts that some of them are new in other places, some of them function better in other places across this. I don't know that any crisis-oriented situations like this have any good places in the country that, you know, where it's not rife with tension and conflict. But we're trying to create, these ideas would try to create a world where rather than going to eviction court, that perhaps it's related, could be dealt with before then. Having full representation for tenants is a proposal that's out there that says if a tenant has to go up to the Tuesday that they have to go to eviction court, you know, do they have anybody who will help them? Because going on a pro se basis, I'm just saying, I'm just going to sit and listen and figure this out, isn't very successful. And I think landlords have, it's a huge expense for landlords to try to evict people. And, you know, we're talking, we've heard numbers, we heard at the public hearing, we heard $12,000 for that particular landlord. For each case of eviction, so we've heard I'd say between $8,000 and $12,000, depending on how difficult the eviction process is. And of course, people, even when they mistreat apartments and mistreat their relationship, either with the tenant or with the landlord, people want to fight rather than. But there's, again, the bulk of the individuals that I'm talking about, and the bulk of the relationships are not as antagonistic as. But this gives us, to your question, this gives us the opportunity to deal with these issues and figure out which direction we want to go.
Okay, thank you.
Representative James?
Yeah, and just on the right of first refusal, so it sounds like if you add it all up, the tenants would have up to 7.5 months to try to buy the building, and during that time, the owner couldn't accept any other offer.
They have 45 days to.
And then if they give notice on like the 45th day, then they have if they give notice that they would like to try to buy it on the 45th day, then they have 6 months to try to put the offer together.
It's modeled on the mobile home park.
Well, it's actually part, it exists in law. It's part of it's part of the mobile home park law. They're actually, it's a cooperative law. It's not just for mobile home parks. It's actually so that already exists, and it's just creating a right of first refusal for the just like as with the mobile home park, a right of first refusal for them. And I thought it also created a fund for people to be able to
cover the costs
and
make it more, and get advice and help with the down payment to make it more likely, you know, if they do decide they're going to do it and do that, it makes the likelihood that it'll go through for the landlord more likely. We did look, you know, we were kind of like, that's a long time for a landlord to have to, and it just, there wasn't really much of a way to kind of slice it down. I think just because of how things work, time needed.
That was part of the discussion.
Yes.
You know, tying up this property. Landlord wants to sell it, it's essentially off the market. for a period of time. And that was part of the discussion, as well as, I mean, one of the things we talked about was what percentage of tenants need to agree to move forward. And, you know, and all of these numbers are.
They can be tweaked. I mean, I can't remember what the law as it is right now. Joe, you probably know.
Which law are we talking about?
The co-op law.
With regard to cooperative housing?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my
Okay.
head, but if you let me know the statutory,
Yeah, well,
I can find it for you.
we'll take care of it. Housing.
And that was also, so we did start talking about it and then we're just like, well, we'll let the committee do those work because we did have limited time to really perfect.
And it also, we thought that the idea of mobile home co-op versus apartment building co-op are totally different things. And so I could not find, I did do research on all of this. I didn't find that law to see whether it existed, but I could not find any information about how much it's been used outside of mobile home parks. So,
Yeah, that we'd have to ask around.
Does this have a tenant amount? Could it be a single person?
Not for cooperative.
Not for cooperative, yeah.
Right over first refusal is.
No, the right of first refusal, yeah, that's a good question. Is it a right of, if my son is in my house and.
I believe it's 2. I
thought it was like 3 out of 4.
Well, we said 2/3 majority when we were,
Right.
we spent all the time.
It had
But I do believe the duplex,
Yeah.
I think was a possibility where we're like,
Right.
how do we account for a majority in that? But I think there has to be at least 2 units, the way it's written.
Because they're essentially buying it together
Yeah.
and they're owning it together, you know, and so that's.
And then we talked about how many of if there were 3 units, how many of the units would have to be occupied by the people in the cooperative, and whether the rents, whether they could rent for the rest of the building or the rest of the units for a higher rent than they pay themselves to kind of
When they
subsidize.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so those are questions that. again,
Those are all committee questions, I think.
Those are all committee questions. I mean, and those, again, that's not so far related to the mobile home stuff, which is the thing that stood out in Arthur Hamlin's testimony was how people in one particular park, they took a hit up front on their lot rental when they became the owners. What they got from that was a stabilization, you know, where they had to just, you know, balance between what the mortgage was and what the proceeds, what the expenses were going to be. I mean, just like anybody else doing business, but they were just operating it at the lowest possible cost to themselves. That was, and again, so that's something that would be not a complication, but a nuance to consider. What's interesting about this so far is it's not outside of this section 4, which is about the working group and the section that came out. There's nothing in here about GA. It's about.
Yeah, that was the kind of the crisis standards of housing, the part that we removed. And that was something that came out of talks with advocates and coalitions. And so that's not in the bill. We removed it when we thought it was going to come here first, because our understanding from legal counsel is that because it's a GA program, it would have to come to us first, or we'd have to add it when a bill came to us. But the crisis standard of housing was just, it looks at right now we use kind of adverse weather conditions for the GA program and during the winter months. And then there's some folks can be eligible outside of those adverse weather conditions under certain eligibility guidelines. So what this does instead is creates what's called the crisis standards of housing. Oh, that's okay. They changed the language. What it was given to us as, it was like really thinking of it as like if would be kind of countywide. And if they didn't have the capacity, if someone was experiencing homelessness, unsheltered, to get into a shelter or other kind of emergency housing within 24 hours, then that county would be in the crisis standards of housing. And so folks would then be placed in a motel central to the area. So they stayed in their locale. And so it might vary, Burlington might be in that and Addison County might not, or, it could vary. So there were some disagreements on what it might actually look like, and that really would have to kind of be, testimony would be taken. So the language really just calls on various groups to kind of come together as the Department of Children and Families to kind of implement a plan and create what those crisis standards of housing are.
So this is trying to adjust over the years, again, before times.
Yes.
the standards changed and were tightened and tightened and tightened. But at any rate, everything was blown out with the pandemic. And so this is to say, we can't necessarily go back. There may be elements that we go back to, but I've heard from the agencies that, we're going to go back to our pre-pandemic way of determining how GA emergency funds are going to be used. And this is saying, wait, let's at least revisit them out loud, because you weren't here 6 years ago and 8 years ago, and these things were tightened up. Is that?
Yeah. And it also, I know it had been a goal to kind of move things to like local kind of control and decision-making. And so this kind of allows the local communities to look at their own resources. And it really kind of forces us to also kind of look at the gaps. So if a county is constantly in those crisis standards, we've got to look at why and do something about it. So I think it will also kind of help highlight where we're really experiencing homelessness and in any given time. When it's on an uptick, I think it will just be able to get a lot of information from this type of program rather than this kind of current statewide program where folks are shuffled out of their communities and based on availability.
And can you just let us know, if you have an answer, what you've been discussing in Human Services, just about what June 30th is going to look like right now in terms of, I know that Representative Wood was testifying in front of appropriations, and I haven't read your budget memo, but can you give us a quick synopsis of like what we think we're going to hear from your committee in terms of what's going to happen because again, short term versus long term.
Yeah, no, right now as it stands, I think June 30th, organizations like mine are going to be handing out tents. It's the way some folks will, under the kind of returning to the old eligibility, will remain in hotels, but the program right now is really set to end.
Well, I didn't mean to end on such a high note. No, let's stop there for now. I appreciate the work that you put into it, and that Representative Lamont was part of the group as well. And I just think it's, like I said, I'll probably ask for this to be a committee bill.
Mm-hmm.
And it is stuff, given the way the session works. We'll be focusing on housing in the second half of the year. And again, we took a lot of testimony the first 3 or 4 weeks. We're going to revisit all that vocabulary that we've heard over the next 4 weeks as well. So just know that this is different than the money that we've been putting forward for building and for organizational stuff and things like the BHIP program stuff that we've talked about and we talked about in our memo. But this is dicier work, it's harder work, because I can assure you that property owners are going to need to have some really open and inclusive conversation in terms of what, but this at least crystallizes what this group put together in terms of what would be the way forward in policy work. So.
And can I just say, I had one more thing about people becoming homeless? And that is that in a housing market like this, like the one that we have right now, it's the most affordable houses or units are also the most affordable for buyers. And so those are the ones that are most easily bought and sold. And as such, when somebody is asked to come up with a huge deposit or a huge amount of rent, it's an unclimbable wall. So these seem like pretty simple props.
Never use the word simple.
You said that, I know.
And I think one of the folks that we'll hear from maybe as early as next week when we're starting next week with everything on the floor from crossover, just know that you'll be on the floor quite a bit when we're able to. I mean, our agenda will have like 10 minutes after the floor, a lot. But maybe we should hear from Ron, if you could just put Kathleen Burke's name just to get an update on the VRAP link again. She was in earlier, and it would be good to get an update of everything that's going on. So thank you for coming in.
Yeah, absolutely, it was great.
For your work.
Thanks, Jubilee.
Thank you. And committee, I want to actually move to Representative Andriano right now. Are you still okay, Josie?
That's fine. Yep.
You sure?
Yeah.
Ready when you are.
We are still on, so
Great.
welcome.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Joseph Andriano. I'm the representative for the Addison-Rutland District here in Vermont House. I serve in the district. And I am the mastermind behind H378. And so I sort of want to tell you all a little bit about H378 and what it's all about and how I came up with it. Just a little bit of background about me because I think it's relevant for this discussion. So I'm a 2005 graduate of Vermont Law School. And upon graduation, I went to work for a firm here in Vermont that primarily did landlord-tenant law and primarily represented landlords. And so I had many years of, about 15 years ago at this point, many years of working as an attorney representing landlords. And one of the things that stood out to me about that and has been a lesson for me throughout the entirety of my life is that most people simply don't understand how the legal system works. And that this creates incredible problems around housing because when people don't understand how the legal system works and we get into situations such as eviction, both the landlord and the tenant have rights and responsibilities. And if people don't understand how it works, it creates inefficiencies in the judicial system and it also creates problems for tenants and landlords. And so there's a lot, so ever since I spent those years as a landlord's attorney, this kept on coming up for me. And when I became an academic, I started doing research on housing. And one of the books that was really impactful to me was Matthew Desmond's Evicted, which if you haven't read Matthew Desmond's Evicted yet, it is one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. And he primarily looks at the causes of eviction. And one of the things he looks at is our legal system and how our legal system creates problems for both landlords and tenants. And so that is the genesis of the ideas that led me to introducing H378. H378, who knows, people know Mike Fisher, the chief healthcare advocate. So this bill is literally taking the bill that makes Mike Fisher have an office and everything like that, doing a find replace for healthcare and inserting housing, and then crafting the bill in order to make it appropriate for housing. So if you were to look at this side by side with the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, and I'll just give you a cite on that. That's Title 18, Chapter 229, the Office of the Healthcare Advocate. If you look at these side by side, they're in the technical side of things, they're almost identical. It's more in the substance of what the Office of the Housing Advocate would do that is our differences here. So I sort of want to go through some of this stuff. So if you look at Section 351, you'll see much like the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, this is by contract with any nonprofit organization. So the Housing Advocate, like the Healthcare Advocate, wouldn't sit inside Vermont state government. It would sit outside of Vermont state government, allowing more independence for the Housing Advocate. The Healthcare Advocate's office is currently centered in Vermont Legal Aid, as an example of a organization that would house this sort of thing. Once we go to page 2 and begin looking at section 352 under duties and authorities, we'll see that the Office of the Housing Advocate has some shalls and has some mays. So section A is the shalls and section B is the mays. So they're going to assist landlords, tenants, and homeowners with housing related questions, providing information, referrals, and assistance to individuals about obtaining or providing housing service. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to sort of summarize a little bit since you all have it in front of you. Education of landlords, tenants, and homeowners about rights and responsibilities under Vermont law. Providing information to those people regarding problems and concerns of housing, as well as recommendations for resolving those problems and concerns. Identifying, investigating, and resolving complaints on behalf of individuals. I think I just called a drafting error, actually. Let me just double check that because it's a pretty important drafting error. Actually, so section 3, there's a drafting error on. So where it says provide information to landlords, tenants, and homeowners, it ought to read provide information to the public agencies and members of the General Assembly. We got a little find and replace happy, I guess. And that section is really important. That's why it just jumped out to me so quickly here, is because I think one of the coolest things about Mike Fisher's office is not only can he help, when he can't help, he can compile information and then come to us and say, there's 20 cases in the past year where this crazy thing is happening with housing. I can't help these people. Here's some suggestions I have. Here's information so we as a legislature, if appropriate, can act. And so there's a drafting error there, so that is a super important one. But that's one of the things we do. So then identify, investigate, and resolve complaints, and assisting people with filing and pursuing complaints, analyzing and monitoring laws, facilitating public comments, promoting development of citizen, consumer organizations, ensure that there's timely access, and submit a report. So those would be the things that the office would be required to do. What may they do? Well, they may actually pursue administrative, judicial, or other remedies on behalf of one of the people who contacts them, adopting policies and procedures and taking any other action necessary. So that's really the core of this. Are these services that the Office of the Housing Advocate would be able to provide to Vermonters and to us as members of the General Assembly about what's going on in Vermont housing law and how can we help people. Mike Fisher, as many of you know him, know that he's been, I think, incredibly successful in this, in both advocating with us and talking to us about things that are going on, but also in helping people. I personally know of several situations where people reached out to the Office of the Healthcare Advocate and got the help they needed and able to be able to proceed. And I just think that's such a wonderful resource that I'd like to see extended to housing. Starting on page 4, we begin seeing some of the more technical stuff. Some duties of state agencies, how confidentiality will work, what's going to be done about conflicts of interest, which is a really big concern when someone may be representing people, and then the effective date. So that's the main thing. There's 2 things I wanted to highlight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. One thing I wanted to highlight is I don't know how you pay for it. In the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, it's pretty straightforward. There's this thing called a bill back, and there's this entire financial structure around it. And so that's very logical because it involves doctors and hospitals and things like that. Don't really have that with housing, so I don't know the answer to that question. And I also want to point out, I spoke to Mike Fisher about it. He has an issue with landlords being included, not because he doesn't like landlords. He's worried about, does this create a conflict of interest for an office similar to his? Where, if both landlords and tenants are calling for help, that could create some conflicts in his office he was worried about. He felt that providing educational materials and things like that would be fine, but more the sort of representation advocacy part of it could be fine. We spoke a bit about that, and he said if this is a bill you're interested in, he is more than happy to come in and talk about his concerns, what he's learned as the chief healthcare advocate. Since the statute, bill is based on that statute, he would be an incredible resource there.
Okay, thank you for getting this across finally.
Thanks.
Weather permitting.
And thank you for, it's cool to have an idea and then for a committee to give you a call, be like, hey, we actually thought your idea wasn't too bad. So I appreciate you at least look at it.
We always try to, hear the bills that people are putting forward. It could start as a courtesy, but it's an idea, again, hand in hand with the with the eviction diversion that we're going to hear about. Is it something that, is it an idea that may bear fruit?
Yeah.
So consider it a seed.
Cool.
And we'll see how it grows.
Thanks.
Representative Chestnut Tangeman and Parsons.
I have no idea how large my Fisher's office is.
It's big.
5 people.
And 5 people.
Okay. And so I'm wondering, do you envision this as being similar size, or just if there's a financial mechanism, are we talking about, $1 million or $30 million?
I don't think it's 30 million. I don't want to randomly just throw out a number because I just don't know the answer to that question. But I would imagine and hope that if this was to become law, that the Office of the Housing Advocate would be appropriately sized to the need. And I think that we, and who knows who would get the contract, but there is a housing group inside legal aid. That's one thing to think about. I don't actually know how many people they have and stuff like that, but they might be, and I haven't talked to them about this at all, so I don't know, but they might be the kind of organization that might, sort of bid for this, or however the department would move forward with trying to make a contract here. So, I can't really speak to how many people would be needed. I'm sure every organization always needs more people and could use them, especially something as large as housing. I mean, we could probably have 100 lawyers working on it, but that's not realistic. So, I think that there will be a contract put together and a need identified and the bid done, or however that process works. And then the administration would make a decision about that. As for the money piece, there's so many, it's hard to answer that question because I don't exactly know how we can do funding on this. In a similar way to the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, it'd have to be general fund stuff, I would guess, unless someone come up with a better way of doing it.
Parsons.
Thanks. I just had a question. You had mentioned he said there might be a conflict with the home or the landlord tenant.
Mm-hmm.
Was that in reference to just in general, or if it's the tenant of the landlord and both of them come to him?
It could be in both situations. So it'd be a really clear conflict if both came to the office. That's, and that would really be, assuming that we were operating under the same rules that I do as an attorney, it would be sort of first come, first served at that point, because, someone calls me and says, hey, and they hire me, and then someone else calls like, oh, well, sorry, I can't help you, I have a conflict. I don't know how that works in his office. I think that in the more general sense, what Mike was talking about was that landlords and tenants have significantly, but different needs and different wants and maybe desires out of the office. And he said, what he said to me is, I'm a consumer protection office. My job is to help people with their healthcare situation as a consumer. This creates more of a situation where you have the landlord, the tenant who's more like the person who's getting the healthcare, and the landlord who's more like either the insurance company or the provider of healthcare. And so you can sort of see how, from a consumer perspective, you might want to be more on one side. However, and again, this is an area where Mike Fisher and I disagree, which is why I think it's important to talk to him. Having had the experience of representing for over 5 years landlords in the state of Vermont, mom and pop landlords, it's a challenge for them. It is a challenge to navigate the system, just in the same way it's a challenge for tenants. The challenge to navigate the system, I had to have conversations with landlords about what they can do and what they can't do. And sometimes they're very surprised because they had heard differently. And I personally think that I think it's important to look at our housing crisis holistically. And we want good quality housing for people, and that involves supporting landlords, but that also involves supporting tenants, and it is a balancing act. And so I think Mike might be able to give a more technical reason. He might be able to say like, oh, these things happen in the office and this is why it's a problem. But philosophically, the reason why I asked for the bill to be written in this way is just that I think that I can't think of anyone that I've interacted with in the landlord-tenant world who doesn't need some help and assistance in understanding it.
Yeah, I think I'd just, or a statement, I guess I'd kind of, that, you know, if they're advocating and basically they're just showing you the path and explaining it to you, I don't really see the conflict. I mean, it's, you know, here's your path you can take and here's your path you can take, and just help them. Do you have any questions? You know, what do you know, I don't really see too much. If it was the same people coming in, obviously.
Yeah, and you can educate, the educational materials can be there, you know, and so that can help both sides.
Remember, Joe, we had a conversation last year about perceived conflict.
Yes.
You know, so
that is, yes.
Yeah.
Also, Mike Fisher's office has about a dozen people besides Mike, not 5.
Okay, great.
No, again, it addresses, the concept addresses something that is admirable. The question is then not even the details. It's like, what's the next structure? You know, we have experience with the Labor Relations Board where the Labor Relations Board is made up of 2 people from management, 2 people from labor, 2 neutral people. So there's 6 people to hear cases in labor management disputes, which doesn't come close to 2,000 potential evictions a year. So the idea of how many of these board members would you have if you use that same concept, it would be at this point pretty astronomical compared to even 12 people. But again, this goes hand in hand with the discussion that we're going to have now about the eviction diversion, which is also searching for a home if it were to move forward, because for the same reasons of conflict. So thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.
So you don't have to walk too far back.
Nope, I don't. I just got to go across the hall. I think I'll be okay.
Nice job.
Thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Yes, you too. And committee, I'm going to keep going here. If we have Representative Levitt, stay where you are, Elizabeth, or do you want to sit up front?
Would you rather I sit next to you or?
You can stay there, then I can look at you. I think it's fine.
So this is a section, 391. I'll have the sponsors describe it. Do you know everybody here?
I do. I caught the introductions, but for those of you who don't know, I'm Josie Levitt, rep from Grandel.
Okay, great. And so again, this a similar concept is in this other bill too, this potential committee bill that we've been talking about, but I appreciated just having it separate.
Oh, sure.
So welcome.
Hi. Okay.
Thank you for waiting.
So I think I just want to sum up quickly by just saying the reason I'm going to refer back to something you said, Chair, which was 70% of evictions are because people owe less than $3,000. And we got numbers from Vermont Legal Aid that was no more than 500 people who don't qualify for emergency rental assistance. So we crafted this specifically think of it more as a bridge rather than it's basically for people who more than half of their income goes to their rent. And these are folks who budget very close to the bone. And if they have an emergency car repair, that costs $800, they need new brakes, they fall behind in their rent. This is to allow them once every 12 months to apply, and this would be run through what is it? Vermont State Housing Authority, and we've allowed $100,000 for staffing for one person, but I love Joe's idea, Rep. Andriano's idea of having a real housing coordinator, and I feel like that could work really well with this. And it allows folks to apply, and the tenant and the landlord both have to agree that they're going to try and work on diversion and work together. And one of the pieces that I really like about this is while it also it will give the landlord the back rent if everything goes through the process correctly. And I like that it will give the landlord the back rent. It will stop the eviction process while this is all happening, and it happens in a much timelier way, wouldn't you say, than a normal eviction process.
Yeah. And it removes the word eviction from a person's rental history.
Right. Good point. That's huge, actually. That's enormous.
And that's a learning curve for us to learn about what is pejoratively called, I guess, a blacklist, but
right.
People have referred to the record. I have a record, and I'd like to get more clarification on that. I've never been a renter in Vermont, certainly, I don't know what that is exactly.
If someone goes to look you up and you fill out a rental application and it says you've had an eviction proceeding against you, you pretty much don't even get considered.
Where does that information live?
That is a great question.
The courts.
Oh, in the court system, of course, because you've gone through the courts.
That way, when they do a search on you, do a background check on you, it pops up.
And this doesn't go through the courts. Right. Which is the beauty part of it. And the other beauty part of it that I like is we are addressing the real issues of landlords who often might have a tenant who doesn't want to go through diversion. And they might say, you know what, I'm just going to skip out. It will pay the landlord up to $3,000 of missed rent.
Yep.
So we're not, for lack of a better word, vilifying landlords, as can happen so often with programs like this. It is definitely an equal partnership. And we expect equal participation from the landlord and the tenant for any of this to actually move forward. They both have to agree. And they're going to work with VHSA and
it makes landlords whole.
Right, exactly.
That was what we took it as a really equal tenants and landlords because it makes landlords whole when as well as tenants. But also,
and it pitches to a very, very narrow lane of tenants who need help. This isn't a tenant who owes $10,000 back rent. This is a tenant who just typically owes $2,700. We bumped it up to $3,000 just to make the math easier. And this would have a slight study component to it too, with data that this person at VHSA would collect, and we'd see did this money help? Or are we throwing money in the wind, and where are these people going to be 13, 14 months from now? So, yeah.
There is with federal money, there is a mediation program that's run out of Vermont Landlords Association, the other VLA. Did you look into that at all?
Yeah, we looked at that, and we also looked at the HOP, that Housing Opportunity Program. Because HOP has some money for that as well, and it does not overlap. It really seems to fill in a few cracks in both of those programs.
Because again, I appreciate that.
It's caulking.
Excuse me?
It's caulking.
Yeah, it is caulking. It is shoring up. It's trying to keep people housed and also keep landlords whole. And again, so many people risk eviction when they owe really what amounts to so little. And this is just to kind of say, okay, this is going to help you. Sorry about your car repair. Sorry that you just lost your job. It also addresses if someone's rent goes up more than 10%. Which I think is very important because that can put people in arrears almost immediately if they're not anticipating it. And I think it's just a way to look at these very specific couple of hundred of people who we found through research that are the ones who really qualify for this.
That fit into that 70% of.
Exactly.
Well, they first start by 70% because it's rent, usually back rent only.
Right.
And not damages and not.
And this is only for back rent. This isn't for anything else. This is just back rent for whatever your reasons are.
Representative Justin Tangeman.
So what was the thinking to focus it narrowly? Was it that that's the easiest group to help, or it makes the program manageable, or?
Well, it seemed like there were some other programs out there that addressed certain other issues. And this was an elegant fix. Not simple, but something that does fill in some of those gaps. And the gap being something that any of us could have. Or at least I know, speaking for myself, I know that I could easily have it.
And also, these are for folks who don't qualify for a fair number of emergency rental assistance. They make, it's a little bit of the missing middle. They make a little too much to qualify and not enough to get out of a bind and dig themselves out of a hole. So think of this as the shovel or a bridge is a nicer analogy than a shovel. But it's just to help those folks who don't qualify for any other rental assistance in an emergency way, but are only behind under $3,000 in their rent. That's the only thing that is imperiling their housing, is just getting behind in rent. And this is to help them get caught up. And we're going to hope that's enough, to be perfectly honest. And statistics will bear us out.
Right, these are grants to fill in that hole.
And it goes right to the landlord through the process. Everyone works together, and then the money goes from the granting agency directly to the landlord, who stops the eviction process. And then they start from square one again.
Representative Howard.
Thank you. So to be clear, if the tenant doesn't want to participate in this program, the landlord still gets paid the rent, the back rent?
That is a very interesting question.
If the tenant doesn't want to, my understanding.
If the tenant doesn't, go ahead. If he doesn't.
Then the landlord continues with the eviction, and they can still collect the money that makes them whole from the unpaid rent. Up to $3,000.
Up to $3,000. In a perfect world, both parties would participate.
Yes.
And if the world, we all know it isn't perfect, but if the tenant decides not to participate, then to my mind, they're forfeiting their right for this. And then this part of this grant exists to make sure the landlords get at least up to $3,000, because the tenant is basically saying, I don't really care what I owe you.
Right.
And if you're not willing to participate in that, then you don't get anything.
Then you go through the court system.
Exactly. And at $12,000 a pop, and this, to some regard, I think takes away the need for everyone to have legal counsel, because it is an eviction mediator. Diversion. Thank you. I'm dyslexic me. So it just pulls it out of the court system, because also we pitched it to the courts at first, and they're like, we are too busy for this. And I asked repeatedly, and a bunch of different court administrators, and they're like, yeah, no, we don't have time. And honestly, this just seems like an elegant solution to what really is a simple problem. And it's such a little amount of money. So with the statistics that we researched, we figured we're going to maximum 500 people, 3,000 each, 1.5 million, and then 100,000 for VHSA for their staffing, for their diversion coordinator.
Saves a lot of money.
What's that?
I said it
Ultimately,
saves money.
yeah.
I mean, yes, the legal fees and the court time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And everyone gets to move on with no black marks, and the landlord gets their money, and the tenant gets to stay housed.
And especially keeping it out of the courts.
Yes.
It's what we call, again, the before times upstream.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
solving the problem upstream rather than waiting for it to happen because of the,
Exactly.
again, preventing people from being kicked out. Starting with the $12,000, starting with whatever the social needs are, the social programs.
And it was really important to us to have landlord buy-in in this. We wanted to fully equally represent the tenant and the landlord because we felt like in a lot of these programs, it was heavily weighted more towards the tenant and not the landlord. And I did my own private research and I have some friends who are mom and pop landlords and they're like, where's our protection? You know, everything's coming down on us. And I said, well, how would you feel about this? And my friend's like, yes, because all of the people who have owed her money have owed, for in her case, $2,000 or less. And she said she would love this because taking someone to court to evict them, she said, is a months-long process that she does not have the time, energy, or money for. And she said this would be a nice, elegant way to get made whole and also keep a tenant who they're not bad tenants. You know, life just got in the way. And that shouldn't give you a black mark so you can't ever rent again. It should, this is just it's a bridge to help you, for lack of a better phrase, get over that hump and then, you know, see how you do.
Representative Labor, then Crescent.
It's nice to help them get over the hump, but is there any stakeholder involved in preventing the next hump?
That is an excellent question. And one of the things that we've written into this is you can only apply for a grant once every 12 months. And one of the things that in a perfect world, and I'm not sure there's enough, and I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not sure there's enough staffing money to really follow those people because we tried to figure out how can we follow people who got emergency rental assistance and that would involve going to the courts, looking them up and then figuring out where they are and are they still homeless or have they turned it around, what happened. But we want to take this and see, does this $3,000 help? And if it doesn't help, then we have to go back to the drawing board and think, okay, this is a greater housing problem than helping someone get over a little bump in the road.
I think an adjunct to that is, again, is the three-legged stool. Are there, like a Pathways is going to offer a home, furniture, services,
right,
toothbrushes, and, you know, they're going to follow through with what I think this, to try to sustain the housing.
Right.
Rather than it just be an habitual, I'm always behind on my rent.
That's the goal. And that is something that possibly maybe, as I'm thinking on the fly, that can be woven into the intake, which is how many times have you fallen behind on the rent? You know, is this the first time you've fallen behind? Or I'm trying to think of a way. It's about data. And it's about data collection. And I think in the rental market with evictions and who owes how much, I don't think we have a ton of great data. And I think we've missed an opportunity with the rental assistance program to really see how are these folks doing now 2 years later. And so this, in a very, very narrow way, I think tries to address that.
Well, we'll definitely have, you mentioned earlier about having Kathleen Burke in anyway, just about the VRAP program. Hear what her thoughts are on housing this program, but it is interesting. I know that at the beginning of the pandemic, the question was we were collecting data, and I just love to see the garage where it's all kept.
Yeah.
You know, because we know I know from legal aid that X number of evictions were avoided in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic with the first slug of money, and then with some of the VRAP money, which was harder to get to landlords because of the strings that were attached. The first slug of money, the coronavirus relief funds, were as string-free as any money that's ever come out of DC to Vermont, and it was really beneficial. People were getting their back rent paid. I think we heard cases of people up to 18 months of back rent were getting reimbursed and still continuing their relationship with their tenant.
Right.
You know, and then of course we heard plenty of anecdotes where people couldn't get one or the other to the table We've heard that the mediation program is a great idea, but it's getting people to the table. It's getting people educated that it even exists.
Right.
And then moving people to the table.
And that's something that partner agencies, Vermont Legal Aid, Vermont Housing, VHSA, they can also start promoting it and then let people know. And it's also something the courts administrators have said they will happily promote this. They won't run this program, but they will, if tenants and landlords come to them, they will divert people to this program. And, I think it should go with every lease that you sign. There should be information about this.
Representative Kraft.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this to us. I get excited about bills, but I'm really excited about this one because I really think this could have a huge impact on a lot of people in different communities and have a sustaining impact, not just be a Band-Aid. And like Chair Stevens was talking about.
That's our hope.
Yeah, I really like this, and I also like the thoughtful research that went into collaborating with both sides as well. And I also have many friends who are small landlords and other things, and I've heard those things in Chittenden County and Burlington, South Burlington. I think this could be really helpful and have a really good long-term effect. So thank you. And free up the courts too from a lot of.
The courts have made it clear they don't have the bandwidth for this. It also keeps it less expensive.
Right.
And I think it takes this, it takes the stigma out of being a little bit behind in your rent because your kid got sick or, I have a friend who needs new brakes and it's $1,000 and that was money that was supposed to go to rent. And now she's sort of chipping away at it and this could help someone in exactly that situation. They're employed. Their housing is so expensive compared to what they make that any little variance is enough to knock them off. And we're going to try and just see if we can help them stay together.
And I also just, what Representative Labor too, is that making sure that I appreciate that those are provisions in there as well, that it's not just a continued bailout every time.
Once every 12 months. And first of all, there's honestly only funding in here for a year. So there's that. Because we kept it small. I think it should be a multi-year thing just to really see, does this have legs? Are we helping the same people over again? And if we help someone twice, does that mean this program is failing? Or does that mean that we need to look at a greater housing issue?
Yeah, we wanted to pilot it for a year and then collect data on whether it was working.
Exactly.
And the other thing that I just, for the sake of, disclosure, Tiff Bloomley was originally part of the.
Yes.
She convened us to work on this.
And then she got herself on her probes and said, I can't do it. And we're like, okay. Yeah. That's why we never see her.
I feel lucky if I get a half an hour.
She's my sister-in-law and I get a hug like once a week, maybe if I'm lucky. Yeah, we are related. And
Goodness.
yeah, I'm like, hey, there's Jeff. Okay. So
Well, we're still alive. So.
Okay.
No, I appreciate you sharing this bill and being patient with us together.
Yes, of course.
It is definitely a programmatic priority. We need to, tear it apart and, look under the hood and see where it's duplicative, see where things can get rolled in.
Yes.
And I also will appreciate the fact that it's part of the subgroup's plan as well. And we'll just keep working.
Yeah.
And I guess the final appreciation is the fact that this is, people can argue with whether it's balanced or not, but the point is that like most of the VRAP money, it did go from VSHA directly to landlords and property owners.
Right.
It wasn't a case where, and so some of the data that we can collect is how did it really go? Because a lot of the opposition before this program, before the pandemic was, well, they're just gonna spend it on something else, or it's not gonna, or they're just gonna spend it and then get behind again and wanna tap into the program. And I think we've seen with the structures that have been in place through the pandemic that it's possible to not live down to those expectations.
Yeah.
And
I think it actually really dovetails nicely with what Joe was talking about. In a way, if you had a housing coordinator who could then funnel people to this program, and then that housing coordinator could work on other things, there feels like a nice synergy to me to that.
yeah, and the CVOEO, just, I'll plug it again, they have a renter and tenant, renter and landlord guide, which is probably 150 pages long, that's probably 10 years old now and is just a really good starting point. It should be kind of the in every rental unit's junk drawer, or something that, or on their counter when they move in, to make sure that people know, because so much of it is
Interesting.
education.
In New York City, it's required that your tenants' rights are, you're required to receive a printed copy of your tenants' rights when you move in.
Oh, that's a really good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the anecdotes that we hear are based on truth, based on actual experience, but also, the ideas that one side or the other has the upper hand in these situations is mostly emotional.
Yeah.
But, emotions are real.
Yeah. And emotions often get in the way of progress.
Right. And so if you've lost your job because for whatever reason, but if life just happens, that's not stressful. I'm sure I can approach my situation without stress involved.
And it doesn't take much these days for things to snowball. So hopefully this will stop the snowball from rolling in a timely enough way that will keep people housed. And people won't have to go to court and the expense and the time of that.
And keeping people housed, would you consider that a Band-Aid just to the rest of it, to the expense and to the, I think that was our thought. It wasn't a Band-Aid, it was a necessary response.
I feel like this, if it works the way we think it's going to work, this isn't a Band-Aid. This is, we're keeping people housed because we're getting them over that life moment. And then it is our hope that that will be enough for them to figure out what they need to do next. And you were going to say something, I can tell.
I was just going to say, because it has a very narrow focus. It's not the same as VREP. It doesn't help people who are homeless to get into a home and stay there. It's not the same as HOP. It's its own thing. So it really is a particular set of circumstances that can happen at any time, and as such should be, able to be undone.
Right. I think the mediation process of it, if the landlord and the tenant could sit across the table and, if it's a life event, if it's geez, I haven't had hot water, so I'm withholding my rent, that's a different situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is, in a perfect world, this isn't going to be antagonistic. It's going to be two people who want that person to stay in that unit and solve the money that's missing. And by taking it out of the court system, I think you bring the temperature down a lot. And I think that will go a long way to having two people sit across from each other and say, I blew a carburetor. This is my plan. Is that cool to you? And then see what happens. And it's a 1-year pilot. And if it works, we can replicate it. If it doesn't work, we can figure out, was it not enough money? Was it not enough time? Did people not want to sit down across the table from each other? But we can really look at how many people used the program, how successful was it, what were the problems? And then we can either say, okay, it's much, much larger housing issue than this. And then this might feel like a Band-Aid, or this might feel like we got to do more of this. with a little bit more money because it turns out there are now 1,000 families that now fit in this very narrow lane. But it could be a really, really interesting year.
Last question for me anyway. Have you talked to VSHA?
I have not directly. We have been working with Vermont Legal Aid, and VSHA has said they would be happy to administer this because they already know how to do these things. And we put $100,000 in this specifically for them to hire a diversion coordinator.
Okay, do we need to interview them? What do you think?
I think it's probably not a bad idea. That would be my hunch, maybe.
Not to do that animal control officer thing.
Right.
Yes.
You had mentioned 500 cases. Is that statewide?
Yes. It's between 300 and 500 families or apartment units that fit this criteria.
Where did that information come from?
Legal Aid. And they're them. It came from them. And they're
I'd be happy to tell you what the thinking was behind those numbers, but.
We'll have you in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
We'll have them in.
Okay.
I mean, the preview is simply that we average between 1,700 and 2,000 evictions or eviction cases a year. And the previous programs with the federal money, there's data that showed how many evictions were prevented. There's also now data showing that once those protections ended, the eviction moratorium on others, that and those monies have depleted, that evictions are going back up to what they were before. So
Right.
that's what, I mean, we'll get finer detail, from witnesses, but that's kind of the number was, I think in the 1 year, I don't remember if it was 2021, I think it was 400 plus evictions were prevented with this.
Right.
But that was a broader program because it may have dealt with larger amounts of money.
Right. It did do well. I'm fairly certain it dealt with large amounts. This is really just for the folks who owe under 3,000, which is roughly 70% of the people who are in arrears. So it's not that much money. That's the thing. So that's why we thought, okay, let's just pilot this for a year and see if this is enough.
And this is, again, the word upstream is what this was always, to me, was always, I'm not going to say it was in vogue, and we certainly weren't solving problems upstream, but that this idea of if we can stop it here, we can prevent the gross expenditure of funds from a bunch of different places, including motel rooms that cost $3,500 a month.
I can't even.
Which is more than the money that we're talking about. So
yeah,
if we can, prevent one person from that.
Exactly. Good point.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Representative from Grand Isle, we're going to have a conversation with you at some point where we're looking at the some of the numbers about what AMI is, what area median incomes are. Like Grand Isle is the highest in the state.
That, and I'm going to just say that is largely skewed because of second property owners. So we have in Grand Isle County what we call perimeter people who live on the lake, who bump up the property and all of the median income enormously. And then everyone who lives in the interior who are, some are well below the poverty level. So it's a very interesting mix.
Yeah.
I'm surprised to see that as well.
Yeah, because it takes a lot to get up to over $100,000 and
that's all the second property owners. And it's people who live on the lake. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, committee, let's call it a day. Ashley, good to see you. How's the kid?
She's doing okay. Her fever finally broke this afternoon, so hopefully back tomorrow.
Great. Good. Great. And we can go out live, Ron. Yeah, thanks, everybody.